And I thought we would discuss, we're going to be discussing the impact of Nigel Farage's intended policies on the cost of living. Now, this actually comes from a report that I saw in The Guardian. Actually, I haven't actually seen the original paper, but it's by a group called the Autonomy Institute, which I've been having a little look at their stuff today. It looks like they've got some quite interesting things. So I'm going to be having a look at in more detail later. But they've produced a report. The headline sort of thing, which we'll talk about, is that climate change is going to increase the cost of food, specifically in the UK, by 34% by 2050. This is on top of the inflation that we will naturally see over the next 25 years, which will be considerable, of course, as it was over the last 25 years. And so, frankly, I'll go through some of the things that will cause it, of course, for those who are already aware. But it just sort of lays bare that Nigel Farage, Reform UK, so they very much play on the cost of living for people. They prey on cost of living fears, and yet their policies will make it all worse. I mean, just in terms of energy, we think about energy, which is a really easy one. As I keep saying, the cost of producing energy from fossil fuels in the UK, when you consider the entire life cycle of a project, so from designing and building, building power plants or whatever it is you're doing, to running it, to decommission it at the end, the cost of producing electricity from fossil fuels in the UK is about £75 per megawatt hour. Now, with solar and wind, now the thing is with solar and wind as well, whatever figure you come up with, it's actually going down as well. That's another thing. The cost of producing energy from fossil fuels isn't decreasing. Our technology on that is already peak, but things like solar and wind are getting cheaper all the time. So at the moment, it's somewhere around about £40, so £75 for fossil fuels, about £40 for solar and wind, and it's getting cheaper. In 10 years, it'll be about £35. So it's just cheaper and cheaper to make it from solar and wind. And then you get these idiots who go, what about when it's not windy then? And it's like, that's how you tell, by the way, whether you're talking to a Reform UK supporter, a genuine supporter who just doesn't understand climate issues, because most people don't, and a Russian bot. Because you just want to say to these people, hey, Sergey, have you ever been to Britain? When is it ever not windy? Like, that's our thing. I thought we're quite famous for it. We're basically a wet and windy sheep infested island. It's our thing. It actually, you have an opposite problem. Sometimes it's so windy you have to turn the turbines off. If you see the turbines not on, it's because it's too windy. What about it's too windy then? Well, what about when the price of gas goes up because Russia decides to invade a bit of Europe again, or someone in the Middle East has a bad day? What happens then? Your cost of electricity doubles like it did last time, because that's what caused energy price in this country. Domestic energy prices literally doubled. Business energy prices more than that. Why? Why? Because the price of gas went up when Russia invaded Ukraine. That's why. Wouldn't have done if we'd have had, as Ed Miliband wants, 95% of our energy from solar and wind, price wouldn't have gone up at all. In fact, if tomorrow, and we can't do it tomorrow, but we can do it in a few years, but if tomorrow, because that's what Ed Miliband should say to Lee Anderson whenever he goes, what would it do to global temperatures if we did net zero tomorrow? What Ed Miller, because obviously you can't, and I've had people in the comments go, well, why can't he answer? Why can't he answer? Because no one's ever come up with a model for it. Why would the world's top climate scientists come up with a model for what would happen to global temperatures if just one country achieved net zero tomorrow? Because it's not realistic. One country, no country that hasn't met it now is going to meet it tomorrow. And also you want to work it out for multiple countries. But what Ed Miliband should say every time, well, what happens if it should stand up? If we had net zero tomorrow, your energy bills would be X pounds cheaper. That's what he should say. Work it out for the cost of having 95% of our energy from solar and wind and the rest from nuclear, if you must. and go, that's what the cost of energy would be, whatever it is, £300 cheaper, whatever they said at the election. That's what they should do. But anyway, this is a slightly different one. So that is how Farage, with his anti-net zero shtick, wants to keep your cost of energy high. Not just keep it high, but make it higher every time there's pressure on gas and oil reserves, right? So then there's this new report, and this is on food, right? So food will be 34% more expensive. In the UK, this is not global food prices, this is in the UK, 34% more expensive, specifically due to climate change. So we're not saying this by 2050. We're not saying by 2050, if you think, some like a piece of food now costs £1, it'll cost £1.34 in 2050. No, it'll cost way more than that. It'll cost over £2. This is on top of the inflation we'll get in that time as well. And what causes that? Things like, in this country, let's focus on this country, although it also has to be said in the UK, because we import such a lot of our food, that if you have a hit to farming anywhere in the world, then that also affects our food prices. And we saw this again in 2022, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine is it's a huge country, but it's a huge agricultural country. Not as much as it was then, because it's had its fields bombed to crap. So that affected it. So anything that affects us anywhere, like we know we had that bad tomato harvest in Spain. We couldn't get tomatoes in the supermarkets. You might have been able to get some in smaller shops if you had a smaller greengrocer near you. But if you're reliant on stuff from supermarkets, you weren't getting tomatoes. Theresa Coffey, who was the farming secretary at the time, said, have you thought about having turnips instead? Which is a weird thing to say. I cannot think of a single use for a tomato that can be adequately replaced by a turnip. I mean, what a mad thing. I mean, could she not have at least said peppers? That would at least make more sense. But anyway, never mind. The point is, if you've got, for example, extreme heat, causes two problems for crops. First of all, obviously, it can actually sun damage them, so your yield will be lower. You will actually damage crops to the point where they're unusable. Secondly, it can create droughts, which means you'll have problems irrigating those crops. So two problems. The actual heat can cause direct damage to the crops. Secondly, if you can't get enough water to those crops, then obviously that will damage them as well. I mean, we saw the effect of climate change on rainfall in the 1980s in this country. So some people of a certain age, certainly my age, will remember the famines in Ethiopia. And it triggered, I mean, that's what triggered things like Band-Aid and Live Aid and Comic Relief. And it was very much put down to what had happened was, it's not that the rains weren't there anymore. It's just that they weren't there anymore. They'd moved. Climate change had drawn it further northwards. So what was happening, instead of rainfall landing on the agricultural lands of North Africa, it was landing in Europe instead, where it was just extra. It's like, that didn't help our crops. We already had enough rain for our crops. It was annoying people. So it's like, oh, it's bloody raining again. So we'd moved the rains from where they needed to be, where traditionally they had been providing much needed rainwater for agriculture in North Africa, to Europe, where we already had enough, thank you very much. And the same thing happens, of course, everywhere. And this is what we knew in the 1980s. And this is the madness of opposing net zero things. It's been common public knowledge, it's been common scientific knowledge for a very long time. Climate change driven by pumping massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Scientists have known about this since before we developed atomic energy, right? You know, it's beyond pretty much living memory that scientists know about it, but the public have known about it since the 1980s. The 1980s was really the time, I remember, where there was still a lot of muddying of the waters, but it was being openly talked about. And so, you know, if you have extreme heat or drought or floods, because in Britain it can cause floods as well. So, because again, what I'm saying, excess rain. You have excessive amounts of rain sometimes because we've pulled it all up northwards. Rains have been pulled northwards. So we already had quite a lot, you know, wet, windy island. But we now get, sometimes we get too much. We get excessive amounts of rain, which can cause flooding. Well, that doesn't do crops any good as well if you don't have adequate flood defences. And you know what? We don't tend to have adequate flood defences, including in Lincolnshire, the county next door to me, where the Reform UK Council have decided to abandon their flood defence committee when it's one of the most flooded counties in the country. Anyway, how quickly are building turbines? Not quickly enough. We're still having to import a lot of them. I mean, that's another thing we need to do. I mean, that's another thing in terms of cost of living crisis. So Farage, being against net zero, is saying, first of all, he wants our energy bills to be higher, right? He claims that energy is higher because of net zero. No, it's higher because of fossil fuels. Second, he wants our food to cost more because climate change is wrecking that in terms of the damage it does. And what happens when you have a bad harvest in the UK caused by extreme weather? We have to import more. Importing more costs a lot of money for various reasons. First of all, the value of the pound since his beloved Brexit is lower, so we pay more for imports now in terms of real terms. Second, there's greater because you're bringing the food in from further away, so there's greater transport and storage costs because food goes off, so you need to make sure it can survive the journey. So, and you know, so you've got greater transportation costs there, but also other parts of the world are suffering from damage to some farmland has been taken out completely. There's some land that is now no longer suitable for agriculture because of climate change. So the amount of food the world can produce is physically lower. We're not talking about the odd farm having a bad harvest, which can happen in any year. We're talking about globally it being more and more difficult to produce a certain volume of food, which means the lucky people are the ones who pay, what, 34% more for it. They're the lucky ones, because the unlucky ones can't afford to do that, so they'd have to do with the less food. So that's also what Farage will be doing. For some people, he'll be raising their food bills. But for other people who can't afford to pay more for food, they have to have less food. So he's starving them, including in this country. You know. Yeah, Vince there saying Ukraine caused a massive worldwide rise in wheat price. Anything, I mean, Ukraine was a huge, it's not just that it has agriculture, like not every country has agriculture. It was a huge producer. So inevitably that's going to hit. And because that is what happens. You know, the food prices are not going up because someone's got a bad harvest. It's not like a farmer going, oh, half my crops are damaged, I'll charge twice as much for them. And if they can get away with it, they will. But it's just the fact there'll be less food. So somewhere in the food chain, because the supply chain, you know, not food chain as in terms of trophic levels, but, you know, in terms of the food supply chain, you've got people are going, well, you know, there's not as much of this, so people will have to pay more for it. They'll just, some of it will be profiteering, some of it will be just to cover their own overheads. They have to charge more. Hilgara there saying, I'll meet my reform friend later. He just refused to engage in reality, prefers the word of Farage. Well, of course, that's unfortunately what people are. I'm going to do a video on Farage and how he works. I was going to do it today, but I might do a proper job of it. I might do it as one of my longer ones for next month. But the way it works, but this is what people need to do. They need to stop listening to people who don't know anything. Farage isn't an expert in anything apart from how to make money for Nigel Farage. That's it. That's the only thing he's ever done in his life, make money for Nigel Farage. Doesn't know about anything. He's not a scientist. He's not an economist. He's not a lawyer. He has no expertise in anything he talks about. And he constantly gets turned over. Whenever he's questioned by someone who knows what he talks about, he always gets angry and tetchy, doesn't he? Because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just used to saying stuff and people accepting it. And he still gets a lot of that because people want him on their shows because he's good for clicks. Oh, Vince there saying Trump doesn't have wind turbines, just cute old-fashioned windmills. Yeah, I wish. Yeah, so he's been moaning about a few things of late. I'm going to do a video on what he's been saying about immigration because for me that's the more important one. But yeah, like windmills. You'd be windmill. We don't have windmills. We haven't had windmills for a long time. Does he know what a windmill is? Do you think? Does he know what it is? Does anyone know what a windmill is? For goodness sake. Where do you think the word mill comes from? Anyway, never mind. The old Don Quixote tilting at windmills. Well, that's very much what Farage and Trump are doing effectively as well. Because, so if we think about it, so on energy terms, net zero will make our energy bills cheap. It's really that simple. How can it not? You know, solar and wind getting cheaper and cheaper to produce energy from. At the moment, it's about £40 per megawatt hour. It's going to go down to £35, down to £30 in like 15, 20 years. I think it's just getting cheaper and cheaper. Fossil fuel can't get cheaper and cheaper because we've already, like, there's no technological developments left for turning fire into electricity. Like, we've cracked it. We've been doing it for so many years now. We've basically cracked it. We can't do it much more efficiently, but we can harness wind and sun more efficiently. And also the thing is, you can only build fossil fuel generators, whether small or large scale, in so many places. Whereas you can capture sun anywhere the sun falls, that you don't need it to land on the ground. You know, if you imagine, I keep talking about things like, for example, if we, you know, like a motorway, you know, you've got the central reservation. So if you have solar panels across all of those, then you don't need the sun to land on the central reservation, right? So if you have solar panels capturing sun there, or, you know, on the outsides as well, then that's free energy. And the thing is as well, it does two things. Because remember, so just let's remind ourselves what the greenhouse effect is. Like, let's just remind us, what is the greenhouse effect? So the greenhouse effect is infrared radiation from the sun, passes through our atmosphere really easily because it's very short wavelength. The physics of this, it's very short wavelength because it's very high temperature. Then that infrared radiation is absorbed by the surface, and then it re-emits it because it can't hold on to that heat forever, so it re-emits it. But it re-emits it at a lower temperature. That means a longer wavelength, and it's that longer wavelength infrared that cannot then pass through the very thick carboniferous layer in our atmosphere. So if you can reduce the amount of that infrared radiation that is absorbed by the surface of the Earth, you can also help. So, for example, one of the big problems we have with the melting of the ice caps, it's not just that it's raising sea levels, it's that ice reflects about 90% of the sun's light. It can reflect it back into space. That can pass back through the atmosphere. Whereas liquid water absorbs a similar proportion. So the vast majority of sunlight hitting ice will be reflected back into space. The vast majority of sunlight hitting liquid water will be absorbed by it. So reduce the amount absorbed, or absorbed and re-emitted, I should say, and you crack it. So solar panels can absorb it and convert it into electricity. So if you have, the more solar panels you've got, not only are you creating more clean energy, if you do it on a mass global scale, if this becomes the norm globally, if you've got solar panels on every roof, if you've got solar panels across every covered walkway, like why don't we? Like, you go to Tesco, and it's different in different Tesco's, but there's the Tesco in Grimsby, for example, which is not the one I go to these days, but Tesco in Grimsby, so you've got the car park, then you've got a covered walkway from the end of the car park to the store, for like when it's raining, I guess. And okay, I haven't been there for a year or two, but when I did last week, there was no solar panels there. If you put solar panels, if you've already got a covered walkway somewhere, put solar panels on it. Why wouldn't you? If it's outside, obviously. But then why would you have a covered walkway if it's not outside? Just put solar panels everywhere, that you don't need the sunlight to hit the ground. I mean, obviously you don't put it over plants, but you can put it in so many places. And solar is really easy to do on a small scale. You can put it everywhere. And you are reducing the amount of that short wavelength sunlight that's been absorbed by the surface of the Earth and then re-emitted as longer wave radiation and then getting trapped in the atmosphere. it's, you can explain this sort of stuff really quite simply to people, and it's not doing. And that's, you talk about your friend there, and they're not. It's because no one's really explaining this stuff to them. Part of the problem as well, your friend will appeal to, or will find Farage appealing, will of course be mistrust in politics. Politicians need to talk more openly to people about things. The problem is there's a temptation for serious politicians to talk about the simplistic solutions that the populists offer and say how, oh, these things are really complicated. Yeah, they are. But people don't want you to talk about complex things. There are plenty of simple things that serious politicians can talk about. Just talk about those. SFAC says, so when I hear windmill, I think of wheat and flour. Yeah, because that's what they are. Windmills are for grinding flour. Well, wheat into flour. So we don't have them anymore. In Britain, anyway. We don't have them anymore. We have industrial level grinding, milling. But anyway. The planet isn't making any more coal. Well, that's a good thing, quite frankly, because we don't want to be burning too much of it. Like, there was a time in the 1980s where, as I say, in this country at any rate, it's been different in different countries. But in Britain now, there is acceptance that climate change is real, even of Reform UK supporters, that climate change is real. The reason why Reform UK have so much support, despite their net zero policies, is because they think the immigration thing's more important. They think it's a more urgent threat. That's the problem. Otherwise, because Nigel Farage is out of kilter with his own vote, or a lot of his own voters. Obviously, Reform UK have the highest proportion of climate skeptics than other parties, but the majority still want action on it. They still support Labour's policies on net zero. They just think the immigration issue is more urgent or a bigger problem for them. But so you have this thing in the 80s, and back then it was tricky, because even though people were coming on to the idea of, okay, yes, we've got this problem, but it was like, but what do you do about it? Because every solution at the time was seen as either asking people to sacrifice their standard of living, which people, are selfish, they're not going to do, or damaging the economy, which sort of does the same thing as well. Whereas these days it's the opposite. We've finally got to the holy grail in many ways of, it's economically better to pursue net zero. Net zero is now better for the economy. If you develop technology, so if you want to pursue fossil fuels, where's the technology there? Where's the future growth for your country? There's very little left. There's no real research and development into the use of fossil fuels these days, other than the damage it causes. But in terms of developing newer ways to use fossil fuels, we've worked it out. There's little growth left in fossil fuel technology now. And even if you could develop new innovative ways to use fossil fuels, the world's moving away from it. Who are you going to sell it to? Who are you going to sell it to? You can't even sell it to Trump's America, because he doesn't want to import your technology. He wants he wants it built in America. So what can you do in Britain? What can you do to grow your economy based on Nigel Farage's policies? Nothing. Because almost no country wants to buy new fossil fuel technology. America might want it under Trump, but he ain't buying it because he wants it all made in America. So you've got no prospect. But if you develop new clean energy solutions, new green technology, the whole world wants to buy that. The whole world wants it. Even America, because America may need to, because Trump is removing subsidies for it in America. So this is one area where you could actually even sell it to America. But you can certainly sell it to the rest of the world. So we'd have cheaper bills. If we pursue net zero, it's really simple. Cheaper bills, easy to show. Food won't ever get cheaper, because climate change is now at such a point we can't reverse it. All we can do is stop it getting it worse. But we can at least keep a lid on the prices of food if we address it and we start to actually manage agriculture, if we at least adapt that. But you can't adapt it to an ever worsening climate situation. And then jobs. You're creating more jobs with net zero technology, green technology. There's no growth in jobs for fossil fuels at all. In fact, it's declining. Even without the shift to green technology, it's declining. There aren't extra jobs in it. Fossil fuels are for developing countries like India and China, but even China's the world leader in green technology. China has actually started to reduce its emissions, not by very much, but it's down. And that is because now China didn't do it for the environment. Xi Jinping is not a hippie. They did it. Why did they do it? So that they could, 10 years ago, they decided they need to reduce reliance on the United States because they were predicting this blow up with Trump. They predicted that America, there was, trade was going to come to blows between America and China, that there might not be a physical war, thankfully. Well, we hope there won't. But they could foresee a future trade war between China and the United States. So why did they develop green technology? Why did they become the world leader? For their own national security. Being able to produce the equipment you need for your own energy is a key feature of any national security policy. Think about it. If you break it down, what are the key things for national security? You need to be able to, if you're going to be self-reliant, if you're going to be completely self-reliant, and it's not possible to be completely self-reliant, but if you're going to do the best you can, you need to produce as much of your own food as possible. You need to produce as much of your own water as possible. Water is going to be a key factor. You need to produce as much as your own energy as possible, as much of your own building materials as possible, steel and ceramic. Those are absolutely crucial. Those are crucial. Then you could add in the modern age as well, I suppose, semiconductors. Now, if you look at Britain, we don't produce much more. We produce technically most of our food, but it's only just a majority of our food. We are wet, so although water companies, because mostly the problems we have with water at the moment are because our water companies did not invest in infrastructure, reservoirs, and fixing leaky pipes and stuff like that. So in terms of water, we can't be complacent, but we are better than many in terms of that. But then it starts to fall down a bit. We're not self-reliant on producing our own energy, and we won't be until we really power up green technology development. And even then, the components will still have to be imported. We're not going to be able to produce the crucial minerals we need. We can't produce all of our own building materials. We can't, steel, for example, we can make steel, sort of. We can't get the raw materials for it. So we are going to be reliant on that and other building materials as well. And semiconductors, we're not even trying. So there we go. Who's popping this? I don't agree China is a world leader in green energy. There are EVs, blah, 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 keep spontaneously catching fire. No, they don't. I think you're thinking of Teslas. They're not Chinese. No, they are. I don't know where you're getting this idea from. They are accepted as the world leaders in green technology. They are selling the most stuff. I mean, that's really the definition of world leader. Where if you look at the global market for all of these green technologies, which country is providing the most? It's China. That's just the definition of market leader. Chinese energy grid is still coal power. They still use a lot of coal, yes, but they also use a lot of clean energy as well, which is why their emissions has actually gone down. So they're moving more and more towards clean energy, specifically for national security purposes. I mean, the fact that the data just shows it. The facts just show it. And Vince there saying about fastest growing sector of the UK economy is the green energy sector. It is, and it's going to continue to be, because it's going to provide more jobs, because you're producing stuff that we need, but also that the rest of the world needs. At the moment, there are some countries that are developing new green technology. There's not that many. America were getting on top of it, but Trump is now, he can't stop it because it is profitable. And, you know, Trump can take away incentives and, you know, financial incentives, inducements to the industry. That will slow it down, but it won't stop it, but it will slow it down. Now, that's not a benefit to the world, but if you're going to think in terms of pure commercial terms, when Keir Starmer talks about Britain developing into a world-leading green energy producer, well, if America sort of slows down, if America becomes like the hare in the tortoise and the hare race, then it makes it more likely. Now, yes, we know that Starmer's hyping it a bit, but we can certainly develop some very useful technologies. Whether we can keep them in the country, that's always the problem in Britain. You know, when people develop new technologies, they end up getting bought by investment firms abroad. So the ideas can get developed in Britain and then the commercial benefits disappear somewhere else. But nonetheless, you know, we will see what happens. Again, if America doesn't prioritise that sort of stuff, then, you know, there is hope. The EU as well. The EU was looking like really getting on top of it. And I think they've slowed down a bit as well. You know, as concerns over Trump and Putin have become more higher priority. I think, and also you've got conservative member states in the EU also putting a bit of a downer on it. So actually Britain could steal a bit of a march on this. It will take time and we'll have to keep Nigel Farage away from Downing Street to do it. But anyway, we've run out of time here. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day, and until next time, I'll see you later.